Hi, my name is Triphosphate, and today I'm going to talk to you about compression. Compression reduces the amplitude of a signal that crosses a threshold. It uses four parameters, which you instruct it to attenuate volume. So there are four parameters to a typical compressor. That is your threshold, your ratio, your attack, and your release. The threshold is the volume at which the compressor kicks in and begins to attenuate a given signal. The ratio is the amount of compression or attenuation that the compressor will apply to a signal once it's crossed that threshold. The attack is the speed with which the compressor kicks in once the threshold has been reached. The release is the speed with which the compressor releases the signal once the threshold is no longer met. So using these four parameters, you can instruct a compressor to lower or attenuate volume. Now, this might seem counterintuitive because you typically hear compressors being used to make things louder. Well, the fact is, the compressor itself, unless you're talking about one that has an automatic makeup gain, doesn't make things louder. It only makes things quieter. Using the compression, you can, as a producer, raise the volume afterwards. And what you've done essentially is to close the range or the gap of the dynamic range. And the first example I can use to demonstrate how a compressor works is right here with my voice. I'm using Fruity Limiter because it's kind of like a Swiss Army knife of compressors, and it has a really nice visual display to sort of explain or describe what's going on easily. So as you can see up here, I've attached a compressor to my vocal track for this tutorial. And if you pay attention here, my threshold has been set to 28 dB, minus 28 dB. The ratio is set to about 4:1. So what this means is whenever my voice reaches minus 28 dB of volume, the compressor will kick in and it will divide the signal above the threshold by the ratio. So if I cross the threshold by 4 dB with a 4:1 ratio, the signal will only cross the threshold by 1 dB on its way out of the compressor. This is extremely useful, particularly for live performances, for getting a grasp of the volume levels of an instrument or a vocalist or what have you. As you can see here, the input signal is coming up and it's reaching this blue line, which is the threshold. And at the top here, you can see how much it's attenuating. And this is extremely useful because I can theoretically talk quietly into the microphone, like so, and the compressor will not kick in. But as soon as I begin to talk loudly, the compressor will automatically adjust the volume of my voice to keep it within a certain dynamic range. Test. Now, as you can see here, the compressor kicked in once I passed the threshold, and it attenuated it by 3.2 dB. This white bar that you hear, this white signal that you see here is the output from the compressor. The purple signal here is what the loudness of my voice would have been if the compressor did not kick in and attenuate. Now, I'm going to try and go through these really quickly and demonstrate 6, I guess, different ways to use compression to your advantage in a mix. The first and one of the most common uses for compression is to make something like a drum punchier. Now, for this example here, I decided to make my kick drum a little bit punchier. What I did first is to raise the threshold, or raise the ratio to a high ratio and lower the threshold all the way. You're going to want to turn your attack from 0 first to, I'd say, 4 milliseconds, 3 milliseconds or so, and you're going to hit play. Now, what this does is it's going to lower the signal of my kick drum after the attack. So if I do 12 milliseconds of attack, okay, now you can really see what's going on. The compressor is squashing out the signal from the kick drum, but only after the attack. So what it's leaving is the initial transient of the kick. And this is how you accomplish adding punchiness to a drum. You tune the attack to how you want it to sound for that very first impact. And then once you've done that, you can go back and raise the threshold. Or lower the ratio. And what you've done is essentially leave the initial transient of the kick intact and squash everything after it, which results in a kind of impact from the kick drum. Let's go ahead and move on. The second example for compression is another common one for drums, and that's called parallel or New York compression. In parallel compression, what you're doing is you're adding a highly compressed version of the signal to the original signal. So for this, I went ahead and made a second insert on my drum bus, and I put a fruity limiter on both of these channels, and I'll explain why in a moment. Here on the parallel compression track, I tuned my threshold and my ratio, and I want the compressor to kick in immediately and squash the signal. As you can see here, I'm compressing by a large amount, so this signal is very squashed down, and now I'm mixing that signal in with the original. I might go in here and tune it, and let me go ahead and demonstrate what it sounds like without and with. Now, what I've done basically is to bolster the original signal with a highly compressed signal, just a little bit of it, enough to make it seem like there's more impact to my drums. Let me go ahead and move on to the next example. Oh yeah, I almost forgot to mention. The reason that I put a limiter on both of them is because when you deal with a compressor, sometimes it delays the signal. And the way around this is to duplicate the same compressor to your original signal. But as you can see here, the threshold is maxed. So this compressor is not actually doing anything. But since it has the same attack and look ahead setting as the compressor on the parallel drum bus, it takes care of the delay, and therefore I'm not getting any phasing issues between the two channels. Okay, let me go ahead and talk about bus glue. In this example here, I added a bass to this track, and I created the bass in massive, and it doesn't have a very constant amplitude because it kind of swells. So I went ahead and added a 3x oscillator set to saw wave just to reinforce the other bass. Now, I have both of these going into here, and they are routed into my bass bus. Now, for the moment, let's not worry about these. The bass bus, on the bass bus, I have a compressor here, and this compressor is basically going to attenuate the volume at a certain threshold, and that threshold is near the top of the loudest point, and it's attenuating just about 3 dB. Now, the reason I've done this is because it kind of glues the two sounds together in a way, by giving them the same transient loudness properties. It makes them kind of sound like they're one sound as opposed to two. Let me go ahead and A/B it so you can hear. Here's without. And here's with. It's a very subtle effect, but it's supposed to be. In fact, most compression, you want the effect to be what's called transparent. You don't want it to be completely evident that you're compressing the crap out of things. So it's a gentle attenuation. It's attenuating only 3 dB on the bus, and it's actually giving me a little bit more room to work with on the other elements, more space in the mix. It's important to note that it's not restricted to basses. You can use that for anything. You can use that to combine several different sounds into a pad, 2 leads into one. It doesn't really matter. Bus compression is just a way to glue things together. The next example is for enhancing reverb. Now, in this situation here, I went ahead and added a long reverb tail to the snare drum, and I made it nice and loud, but it's a little too loud, so I used a compressor to go ahead and make the volume of the reverb constant, or more constant. And let me go ahead and turn it off so you could get an idea of what I mean. Now, if you look closely here, the snare's reverb is hitting minus 12 dB. It's almost as loud as the snare itself. So I went ahead and stuck a compressor on the chain with a low threshold and a high ratio. And what that does is it squashes the signal from the reverb down, and it makes it sound constant. It kind of still has the impression that it's loud at the beginning because it still tapers off, but it's not consuming all of the headroom that it would have been. If you pay attention here, the signal is hitting minus 15 dB at its peak, and my threshold was at minus 35 dB. So it's attenuating 17 dB of sound at the impact. And because of the slow release, it lets off nice and easy, and the signal, basically, it sounds like a bed of reverb following the snare drum. And it left a lot of headroom intact. So let me go ahead and cover the next subject, which would be sidechaining. And this is probably my favorite use for compression. In this example here, I did a very simple one, very common one. I compressed the sub bass whenever the kick hits. Now, setting up a sidechain in FL Studio with the Fruity limiter is really easy. I went ahead and took the input here from my sidechain track, which is really just another track that receives input from the kick. And I clicked on this button right here, and you turn this knob all the way down to 0, and it's going to receive the signal, but it's not going to come out of the channel. It's only going to come through the compressor. And it's going to use that signal as the instruction for the compression. So I set the threshold to 0, because the minute I want the kick plays, I want it to attenuate the signal. And I set the ratio extremely high, and then I tweak the release to kind of get it to sound a little bit more natural. Remember, the release is how long after the compressor is done does it release the signal? Does it return to its original volume? So if I hit play, oh, I almost forgot. Once you've directed the routing and you have this sidechain signal coming in here, you have to go into the compressor and right-click on this little box here and select which channel the input is going to come from. There we go. So you can see here the sub is coming in at a constant minus 13 dB, but as soon as the kick plays, which is this blue signal right here, the compressor kicks in and is attenuating it completely, and the release is letting it slide back in shortly after. Here's a little bit more of a creative use of sidechain compression. In this example, I took my bass and I ran it through Saturn and I saturated it to get some more harmonics, some more high end out of it. And then I went ahead and I routed it to a two different inserts. One of them is only passing through the low band up to about 400 hertz, and this one is only the high signal. And there's a reason I picked 400 hertz. And the reason I did was because I added a lead here. And this lead pretty much starts around the 460 hertz range. So what I did was I decided I needed to make some more room for the lead sound from my saturated bass. I still want a grungy saturated bass, but I decided that it doesn't leave enough room for my lead. So I took the lead signal and I sidechained it to the high end of the bass with this multiband splitting. You can go ahead and look at my other video on frequency splitting to get an understanding of what I was doing here. But I basically split the signal so that on this channel, we only hear things over 400 hertz. And then I went ahead and put a limiter on it, and I used the sidechain signal to make the compressor attenuate this signal whenever the lead is playing. And what that's doing is it's attenuating the high end of the bass by 10 dB every time the lead goes off, which basically is cutting into it, and it's leaving more room above 400 hertz for the lead to take over. And here's the net result. Let me go ahead and bypass it so you get an understanding. It's very subtle, but like most uses of a compressor, unless you're getting really creative with it, you're looking for transparency, you're looking for subtle. If you're compressing and it's blatantly obvious that you're compressing, you might be compressing too hard. So if you like the video, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time with some more.